some major area mentioned. But before that, I would like to circulate and all of you have been circulated this text, right? So you have a total 11 groups. You have a total 11 groups, and I would suggest that these three passages are to be divided amongst 11 groups. And you selectively choose which group would take this first paragraph, second paragraph, and third paragraph. And what I expect from you to make an analysis of this particular paragraph. You understand what I'm saying? I expect you to make a presentation of this particular paragraph. What I'm trying to look at as a researcher, all of you write thesis. And it's not a question of collecting data and writing. What is important is explanation. And this is what we will be engaged in explanations in social sciences. What are the different modes of explanations? And you need to be very conscious and careful when you write a paragraph. Because most of the times, we do not know what we are articulating. Even sometimes we look at the data and how to articulate that data. So there are three sets of paragraphs, which I expect you to choose, to reflect upon, to look at, to address, that how to analyze these paragraphs. So I think, again, this idea has to be 11, since there are 11 groups. Select 4 groups roughly, we make them together, and basic key pointers, just they would like to take, this is number 1, which group will take this number 1, and how many groups will take number 2, and how many will take number 3. So let's have their response and their take on this paragraph. This will be an exercise. This will be an exercise which will make you very clear. This will be an exercise which will make you very clear about explanation. Because I think one area which is missing in social sciences is explanation. Because, I mean, whenever we talk about method, it's not about methodological individualism or a critique of method. What is important is explanation. And these explanations are informed by the method itself. And I remember in my student days, yesterday when I was talking to Rishi, that in my student days, we used to read a lot about explanations in social sciences. Because there are different forms of explanations. Starting from you talk about genetic, intention-based explanations, or even you talk about empirical generalizations. There are different formats of explanations which is involved when you make an explanation in social sciences. I think this is what is missing nowadays. Even though I amass a lot of data, I'm not able to articulate and present it. And that is where I make a mistake. So that is where we need to be very clear. I think already in the morning, in the afternoon, Abhijit already did discuss a lot about the idea of Popper, a critique of what we call logical positivism or empiricism, and also talked about in what way the whole notion of science is all about falsification. But there is another aspect which is equally important, is verification. Verifiability, what we call verifiability. It's not about merely to critique and to falsify science. It is equally important to verify, verifications, verifiability. And that is what Popper does not emphasize much. On the contrary, there are a lot of interesting debates about what you call, whenever we talk about empiricism, logical positivism, there is a lot of interesting arguments about what you call developing a sense of, that concepts are always a mental constructs. I mean, I remember in our student days, we went for a field work, and we had have been taught concepts which are very, very abstract in nature, like social structure. So we went to the village and we sat in the chopal of the village and he asked the mukhya that where is social structure? He asked where is social structure? As if social structure is something which is physically verifiable. I mean, you can see this is what is a social structure. So what I'm saying is, these are all constructions. These are all constructions. These are all constructions. I mean, these are all constructions, and that is what we need to understand, that how these constructions, what are those institutions that falls under social structure, within the rubric of social structure. That is what we need to understand. Where do these come from? So most of the concepts are all mental constructions. Most of the concepts in that sense are all mental constructions. We sort of try to, if at all we would like to make a mental construction of a concept. At the same time, the question also arises in a logical positivism, is that how do I define a concept? How do I define a concept? Or what are the parameters in which I can measure a concept? You know, these are concepts which are abstract mental constructions, so I need to operationalize the concept. I would like to extend that particular concept to my field setting and probably would like to operationalize the concept. But in the process of operationalization, I would suggest that there is no finite sense of operationalization. I think that is where a mistake we do, and that is where logical positivism, we sort of, whenever we try to operationalize, we limit ourselves, and that is what even the liberal scholars like Charles Taylor and others would critique by saying that, look, there is no end to such kind of operationalization. Operationalization will increase an entity, and probably that is where most of the logical positivism itself falls short in its argument to identify or even to operationalize. But however, science, as you know, that science always believes in measurement, science always believes in that measurement, and that is what we sort of try to struggle with, this idea of exact science, and this is what is science, and that is where the initial social scientists, they struggle to make it as an exact science or a quasi-science, what we call that we can measure, we can count in terms of numbers, and this is where. I just give you one example. We will take one example, probably and illustrate here, and take a diagram and see that how actually we define a concept. Now, if I say that function, let's use the term function or communication. Let's say communication. How do you define a concept? What are the key elements that comes to your mind when you say communication? Yeah, feel free to say. Now when we say communication, what do you mean by communication?
Agency.
Okay.
Sharing.
Sorry?
Sharing. Transmission.
Change. Yes?
Coding.
To say it.
Coding.
Yes?
Noise.
Communication is noise. I do philosophy. Great. China.
Encoding and decoding. communication as knowledge.
Knowledge. Okay. Participation. Okay. Very good. Yes.
Emancipation.
C. Yes.
It is a process.
Process of what?
Process of communicating. Two-way process. One is the person who is conveying the message to the
Exchange. Now you see, you have given so many terms. There are so many such terms which requires different kind of engagement. All of them cannot be verified. All of them cannot be verified. Not all of them can be verified. And some of them are, they need a different engagement altogether. Now, I would just like to bring to your notion that out of this whole, there is a mechanistic meaning, of course, like transmission, feedback, noise, channel. These are very highly mechanistic jargons. These are probably, you are trying to define communication, probably I would say after Industrial Revolution or exposure to know about steam engine, magnetic wire, to which communication traveling, and that is why Industrial Revolution. So these are the products of Industrial Revolution, because as we know that transmission is a term emerged as a metaphor for transportation. So prior to Industrial Revolution, it was actually as a part of the geography, transportation was only the term through which people moved from one place to the other. Along with that, they moved themselves, whether it is to land, air, water, doesn't matter. But they moved themselves, like saying that if you have seen the medieval serials where the man with a horse coming to you. So that's why I think that postman, I was giving an example about the postman and so on. He's merely a carrier of the message, but he doesn't own the message, right? He's just a mere carrier of the message, but he doesn't own the message. Now, these are all technical jargons, noise and comes, we know about. If it does not reach, or there are transmission problems where Shannon and we will talk about that are noise, noise, then the redundancy, and these are all technical terms, being a telecommunication engineer. He's sort of trying to understand society as a system. So telecommunication as a system through which sort of trying to understand. But most of the metaphor which we are sort of trying to derive is actually from our prior understanding before we understand the world through our empirical observations. So that actually comes with an analogy of organism. Society is an organism. So like that communication here. Whenever you talk about communication, you're looking at it as a body. So body is a metaphor you find across all disciplines. Before empiricism came, people always related to body. No matter all social sciences, you look at political theory or sociological theory, all theories across, you find that there is always a metaphor of body as an organism that was always being borrowed to understand. In fact, if you find the early writings in communications, before empiricism came, that actually talked about, in fact, one of the leading, what's called jurists, even like Tarde, or even the early writings where they were sort of trying to see the blood circulations in the body itself, and along with that, or even the nervous system. This is just a query.
that in this program schedule, the topic is about the empiricism in research.
Right.
But in the slide, we have empiricism in communication research. Is it the same or?
Yeah, it's same. Because already, I don't know, really has put it. It's actually empiricism in this.
Okay, thank you.
So it's actually, already we had, earlier section was all about positivism.
Yes.
So whether you call it logical positivism or logical empiricism. So it is the same. It's actually that alternately the terms used. Because I thought that already the earlier section was used more about social science explanation, social science. But probably we have not gone much into explanations in social sciences. How explanations are used, and secondly, more specifically in communication. So that will be, because already in the earlier people spoke about social sciences and theory, in fact, which he referred to the kind of Max, whether elaborated, in a very elaborated manner. Maybe then we take that as a point of departure and move forward and try to see that in what way it connects to communication and see that in what way these are being extended. So, but before that, I'm sort of trying to propose that whenever we understand society, that basically the metaphor, which is immediately evinced before us, so that is what we take as a point of view, and that is where body is across all social sciences, humanities, even organism, in fact. Organism is used as a metaphor, body is used as a metaphor to understand. So body is used to connect with society, and we said that the way the body functions, society functions as well. So we make a comparison between body and society. This whole body-society axis, body-society metaphor. Similarly, within the body, the way the circulation systems are, one jurist sitting there and trying to study and understand the way the blood circulation takes place. That is probably the way even communication takes place in society. Or even the nervous system, where you find the way, even in fact the metaverse, mostly you find the metro, the railway networks, the city's metro networks. We have it informed by the nervous system itself. It's all human organisms, the organs. If you just locate it and you can see the metro networks itself, because most of these metaphors are actually borrowed from the existing knowledge what we have experienced. So to start with organism as a point of entry, we try to see body. But later on scholars critique and also try to find out the shortcomings of such body-society axis, body-society. You can't, there is no homology between body and society axis. After all, body behaves. It's very easy to find out what you call problems in a body, but it's very difficult in a society. Very difficult. In fact, you find that it's very difficult to say that what is the root cause of communalism in human society. But probably in a body, if hand is not functioning, you chop it, like in army, your leg, you have to ampute your leg, because otherwise you can't survive. So then you are in an artificial leg, so you can manage. So body society dynamics has been much researched and debated. We found that there is a shortcomings of analysis of body. But however, the idea of organism which played immensely an important role in understanding communications as well. So communication, the early debates we find that we bring, trying to also by an analogy or metaphor, we are trying to understand in terms of body. But later on you find that people also wanted to see that it is not sufficient, and this is where you find the great word of new empiricism came to more and more extend to the larger world and see and how people actually communicate on the ground, and that is where we find the early writings came up. But this is also the time when the same what Biswajit was saying. In fact, one of the Canadian media scholar, Dallas Mead, writes that the acumen is called communication science, the acumen. So he talks about that after exploitation of nature, after exploitation of nature, science has exploited nature completely. Now it's the time to exploit human beings. Now it's the time to exploit human beings. You want to control human beings. I want to make you predictable. I want to make you predictable so that I can predict you. So that is the idea. Communication as a science is emerging. So in a way that you are talking about that how communication can be predictable. That is most important. So this is where the idea of measurement fitted in very well when you talk about communication studies. So for the first time, an attempt to develop the science of communication. The science of communication. Communication also has to grow. It has to grow like any other discipline, and that is where communication does. To begin with, it started in Chicago. I was talking about excellent examples and studies were done where this whole human ecology school in Chicago, and where you find that Robert Park, who I just briefly mentioned the other day, he was trained in Germany, in Heidelberg, coming to Chicago and starting this as a part of this whole Second World War project. And they're also trying to study city. And city becomes a spectroscope. City also becomes an experimental ground. In fact, Robert Park is Robert Park has a numerous contribution subsequently which was used in America for city planning, urban land planning. From Chicago it moved to the other parts of the world, along with the Louisville and others. There's also in a way that you were trying to study communications, as some of you talked about sharing, some of you talked about participation, some of you talked about culture, some of you talked about process, some of you talked about exchange. So in a way that you find that Robert Park is trying to define communication in a way that how it contributes to culture. Even if it goes to a point of Habermas as well, when he talks about public sphere, he thinks about there is a notion of idea of a sphere that people are sharing. There's an idea of sharing, people coming together. People want to nurture about certain common spaces. So that is the connections where you need to see. So the initial idea of communication, culture, sharing also comes because of the nature of groups. Charles Cooley, subsequently which comes and who has written about in a primary group the kind of communications, in the secondary group the communication takes place. Because the more and more you are a small group, there are different forms of communications. The moment you become a part of the secondary group. So these are already debates which is taking place in the early 1930s and 40s when communication and science, in a way it is an interdisciplinary science. It is sort of trying to borrow ideas from different fields and trying to develop that sense of interdisciplinarity in communication. So that is what we find in the initial 40s. You find that in Chicago there is an attempt, people coming from diverse backgrounds, even from the information science. And Robert Park studied and did a PhD in Heidelberg on racism, and also worked in a newspaper for years on the blacks, American blacks. Subsequently, they have a project. They are committed for a project, and that is also regarding building the idea of community. How through communication you create a sense of community. So you see all these ideas, what you see, culture, language, sharing. You know, these are all part of creating, constructing a sense of community, building together, bringing together, forging together. Because America was a very difficult, challenging society. In early 1920s and 30s, all the refugees migrated from different parts of the world. Your next door neighbor is a Spanish, the other one is an Italian, the other one is a German. How do you bring them all together and construct and forge a sense of community? And that is where technology or print or the newspaper is sort of trying to force them an identity and creating a sense of community. So that is what we find in a way, technology here can be understood as a kind of a control mechanism, forging identity, bringing them together, and this is where you find that the early writings and understandings took place, that how through communications, also we are trying to study communication as a socialization, communication as a culture, communication as an exchange. So these are different kinds of meanings which we sort of find all together, that initially where you find that it came after 1930s. Subsequently you find that during Second World War, there was a major challenge as well coming up in other parts of American universities, where more and more people now are having more technical methodologies, as we were talking about methodological complexities and measurement variables and so on. We find that this is where it's also market, which also defines the funding, who is funding your research, what is the purpose of funding this research, and that is also the time when market demands, there are market-driven market demands also coming out of research. That is where we find, on the one hand, this is also the time to find the war, interdisciplinarity, and there is a purpose of talking about propaganda and how to counter propaganda. This is actually all studied during that propaganda rules, that how you counter propaganda and how to create, to forge a sense of community. That is also the time. Today scholars are critiquing even the great father of propaganda, Walter Lippmann. That why that Walter Lippmann has been studied across the world without even thoroughly critiquing it. So now today's scholarship in American intellectual history of communication completely even negates Walter Lippmann. So, but still we are legitimizing through our textbook writings, because we do not have a critical engagement with such writings in India. But then subsequently you find that Second World War is a time that where you find that there is a massive deployment of aid. On the one hand, you are legitimizing communication as a science. You are, on the other hand, also you are trying to study the industry and market nexus which has come out today. So the question is, what we think today about industry and academia nexus. This existed long time ago. It's nothing today. Suddenly, all of you API score, you have to write how many industry collaborations he made, how many times he brought industry, as if by bringing industry there will be a revolution in the academic institution, which is quite shocking. Probably in the US it is possible. Because secondly, we expect that as an industry consultant, you got a huge fund immobilized. Then you went to the department and you said, look, I have brought a lot of money. I would like to do research. Give me a space. So this is what Harvard does. So that's why Harvard is so rich. It's not its own money. It always gets money from Ivy League, all the Ivy League universities. They get mobilized funds from all over the world. Even our Tatas and Ambanis, they also fund to all these Ivy League universities. And so that they will immediately open a guest room somewhere, a lounge somewhere. So that somewhere, this is how the institutions have survived and privileged. But not in India, because we do not have such philanthropists. That is saying that there is a death tax in the US. There is a death tax in the US. If I'm dying, I have a huge fund, it will automatically be taken by the state. So before that, it's better that I create an endowment and a fund and someday and give it to, and that is how you find the whole American funding which you see is all given by this thousands of acres, hectares of land is given to the university. Whether it's a cigarette company or a shoe company. I went to Rockefeller. In fact, if you see the early foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, I mean, they are the earlier pioneers who actually in 40s and 50s are funding. What are they funding? It's actually about science, what you are referring is all about radio projects. There's all radio projects, Princeton radio projects, or you find all the radio. You talk about on the one hand 1930s and 40s, all the radio and television, which are highly privatized radio and television stations. Like Rockefeller is having 40 radio stations. Then you find even all these big foundations are owning America in terms of having television and radio stations. No, it doesn't match anything. Doesn't match anything. It's just a beginning that is crazy. And they're into
Education.
Schools, so that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about schools. Philanthropy and education.
no, but here they're making business, big business.